but I love Rob for doing this. I love Joe for doing this. I didn't know that Jewish people didn't pray for their enemies. Like, what? Wouldn't you just do it? Just, I don't get that part.
It's unleavened. Unleavened. Oh, fucking love it. That is Joe's new name. Joe is unleavened.
So here's two lawyers having religious conversation
on a very sensitive topic.
Yes,
we respect each other.
Yes,
and Joe said several times during the conversation. So did I. Please don't take what I'm saying to offend you. And I looked back and said, no matter what you say, you're not going to offend me. I still know who you are. It's not going to change my perception of who you are.
Right. And I'm going to say this to any of you who are watching. Nothing that I say to Rob or Rob says to me is designed to offend any Jewish persons, any Christian persons. It's really just a matter of exchanging and understanding, broadening your understanding of another faith.
Yep. Joe is an Orthodox Jew. And I am a converted Catholic. A lot of you guys probably don't know that.
I didn't know you were converted.
I was converted.
Were you like captured by like Roman Catholic gypsies?
No, it wasn't that. It was, all right, we're going to do this here on your street. This is the safest place to do it. The safest place to do it.
Were you threatened, like put to the stake? It's like accept Roman Catholicism?
No, not at all.
Maybe you were Morano.
I was about to get married. And I had suggested to my spouse at the time that perhaps she should get back involved with her faith that she had abandoned. And we start going to church again, over and over again. And the best was I went through what's called a Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, RCIA. Me, I'm a pain in the ass. I'm a lawyer. So every time he's relaying this principle, I'm questioning it. And the funny thing was, with a lot of priests and with a lot of theologians, you'll ask them questions and they reach a point where they say, and that's where faith takes over, right? Like you get to that point and they say, well, that's where faith takes over.
Right.
Well, it's always a question for me of when you hit that point with them and what that line is and how far you can actually get with logical responses before they say, and that's when faith takes over.
Which comes across as, I don't know.
Yes, it does. And that was Father Pollard. And
basically he impressed you with his intellectual take on religion.
No, he challenged me.
Did he?
Yeah, very much so. He challenged me. He was saying, find an alternative, discuss it with me. And we would have these discussions where even when that class would kind of whittle down and people would just leave, I would be sitting there going, no. I need to understand this. You need to explain it better. Can we do this? Like, have this debate. Thank you very, very much. Old Testament versus New Testament sitting here.
Yes. And that's exactly where this conversation is about to go.
And that was kind of one of the cool parts, was we were talking about the concept of divinity.
Right.
And
Messiah.
And Messiah.
Right.
And the distinction in the Jewish faith versus the Catholic faith, the Christian faith, about who Jesus is. And that was when the concept of the Trinity got brought up.
Right.
Now, what I want you to recount.
Give my understanding what you were saying about the Trinity?
No, I like the Moses part. When you were talking about that part and how the Old Testament and Moses appears, reappears, and how the timeline works.
Yeah, I always thought that Christian belief felt that there was always a Trinity.
It is, and it's not. It is and it's not. And this is part that kind of is difficult to explain. Humans have a limited comprehension. We have the limited ability to understand things. For example, for a long time, humans believed that the earth was flat. We believed these things because that was the scope, that was the full extent that our brains could comprehend.
And even to this day, the fact that there are paradoxes that we can't understand or explain is a display of the limits to human intellect.
Exactly.
So the common question, like as a kid you hear, is God powerful enough to create a rock that God cannot destroy? So that's a paradox.
Yes.
So there has to be an answer to that question that God can understand, but we're too limited in our capacities to actually answer that question.
And that's the exact point I was trying to make. Time itself doesn't exist to a being in the Christian faith that is God. Time itself does not exist. The Trinity just exists. It is in the ether, it exists.
Okay.
And the Trinity is God.
Could that, in theory, split further? A future time for us that would still be always having been?
Interesting. That's an interesting discussion. I actually didn't think about that. That's probably true. If you carry that logic to its rational conclusion, yes, God is revealing himself in a way that only we can understand given the scope of our intellect at the time when we are presented with him. In great extent to what Moses did and what all the prophets did to get them to that point. And then God goes, you know what? We are ready for phase 2. Now, keep in mind, God doesn't see time. God is looking at us and dumbing himself down to us in that moment and saying, phase 2. Now, I'm going to extend the part of my divinity in human form. And I'm going to let you see this person walk among you. And he is going to be the Messiah, but also an extension of me. God created himself in human form to be able to communicate to his people in a different fashion. So that God himself, who is now both human and deity, can experience the human experience and educate his people having gone through that. And then by sacrificing the human part of him, he becomes divinity whole again. Jesus is no longer a walking human. Jesus has now rejoined the divinity in the ether.
But we obviously can't really comprehend the whole absence of time thing.
I know.
So since we can't, we sort of have to break this down into like into our ability to perceive. So I think it's probably just easier if we just stick with there being time.
So who exactly was Jesus talking to when he said, God, why have you forsaken me, if he was the same entity? He was two people at one time. He was a human and he was a divine. And the God, why God have you forsaken me? That is actually the first part of a psalm that is actually not actually asking why God forsaken, why God struck down the person. The rest of that psalm, as I recall it, is actually a recognition of the divine. When Jesus said that, God, why have you forsaken me? It was not saying that exactly. It was the rest of the passage that got left out.
All right. Okay. So I was explaining to you that the concept of Messiah actually comes from Torah. So the first 5 books of that Christians refer to as the Old Testament, there are certain important changes. Important, what I mean is that they actually draw different implications, and I think they actually show the split with respect to where Christianity starts breaking apart from Judaism. For example, and this is my own theory about this, but like the 10 Commandments themselves, your version of 10 Commandments is very different from what we recognize as being the 10 Commandments.
Your version of 10 Commandments, if you recall, what's different about it?
So I don't recall what your version is, but I know, for example, our version, the first, I know it's the Jewish perspective of the 10 Commandments. Well, one key difference that I was thinking about is you have thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
And we have thou shalt not commit murder.
Ooh. I see the distinction.
Which the distinction there is obviously whether under Christian philosophy,
the killing is wrongful.
Killing automatically is wrongful. Whereas in Jewish philosophy, self-defense is completely is not in any way a sin. We don't believe in turning the other cheek. We believe in actually that's a new introduction by Christianity.
If you even in defending yourself, if you strike down a human, you are now part of the Torah. Okay, I get that,
and that's a difference. That's a primordial difference between Judaism and Christianity. So, but I actually asked myself, I was like, a lot of Jews converted to Christianity, and I said, I don't understand why they would. The same sort of argument that bothers me with respect to this question, with respect to why Jews accepted Messiah. Now, if you weren't Jewish, you were pagan, you had nothing to do with it, and he comes along and, he's giving these inspirational messages, and the people referring to the Messiah, that I understand. But if you're a practicing Jew and you study Torah and you understand the Torah, And you know that this is expressly foretold in the Torah, that something like this would happen, and that the difference between a person who's genuinely Messiah and someone who's not is that someone who's not is going to start changing the rules, and that's precisely what we're seeing Jesus do. So then I'm like, why would anyone say
No?
That's the Messiah that was foretold?
And this is something that's a unique. Well, so when you said he changed the rules, not really true.
Okay.
A little bit.
Okay.
Not really true.
Okay.
So New Testament, Jesus is put before a bunch of rabbis and they quiz him. They test him. They are testing his merits. And they go back to what you said. You cannot change. What was the phrase you coined? It was the there will be someone that will come and they will try to change it, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So they go into this test of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
As people are starting to proclaim him to be Messiah, and they test him, and they quiz him, and they cross-examine him. And the answers that he gives they're not changing Scripture. They're not changing the Torah. They're not changing it. What they're doing is they are giving an answer that is far more complex than could be explained by a simple phrase. So thou shalt not kill does not mean thou shalt not murder, right? Difference, very difference. And there's nuance there.
Mm-hmm.
So when Jesus answers, he comes back and he gives the nuanced answer. He gives a different answer that doesn't actually change the words that were written on the page. It just gives a broader interpretation. And he does this to the rabbis, much to their frustration.
Will Joe burst into flames if you read the New Testament?
No, Joe is fine. Joe is in the house of a Catholic. He has not burst into flames yet.
Yeah.
He's going to survive just fine, I think. If I send a picture of a pile of ashes tomorrow.
Here was Joe.
Here was Joe.
Yeah, let's move on. All right. In turn the cheek, Jesus was not speaking literally. He meant choose the path of love, not hate. He later tells us to pray for our enemies. Yeah, that's the thing. That's what I was saying. It is different. We don't pray for our enemies. We don't pray for our enemies. We're not supposed to be like, we don't pray for our enemies. That's one of the major differences right there. Well,
so
what I understand is this is what I never understood about this. If he came here to suffer for man, in that case, why, assuming there was Jewish involvement in that, why would that be something? Then in that case, didn't Jews help man get saved by enabling him to go through that suffering? Assuming Jews were involved in it. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is what I understand. If the whole plan was for him to go through that suffering, so then why would there ever be any blame assigned? If forgetting Jews, whoever's responsible, Pontius Pilate, why wouldn't you say, well, Pontius Pilate did a great thing. He was a vehicle for ultimately for the according to Christians. I mean, it's not obviously not a Jewish perspective, but I'm saying to Christians who believe that Jesus' suffering was for the benefit of mankind, wouldn't Pontius Pilate be a vehicle to enable that salvation?
See, now you have hit the part of Catholicism and Christianity that is one of the most hotly debated elements of the faith right now.
Okay.
That's where you're hitting right now. Was it Pontius? Was it Pilate? Was it
Those are two different people?
No, Pontius Pilate.
Okay.
One person. Was it Pontius Pilate? How the trial took place? How was he convicted at trial? And what was the sentence and who imposed it? And there is a lot that is being discussed to this day about what actually took place.
But you understand my question with respect to why should anyone be resentful 2,000 years later for creating, from a Christian perspective, the salvation of man?
Because the iteration of the Bible that basically said it shall be on us and upon our children was part of the justification, at least in part, for a certain part of history we don't talk about, namely the attempted eradication of a race.
That Okay.
That was an attempted justification for that.
Can you believe that talk? I can't believe that talk. I can't believe I left my air on. My bad. Okay, can you believe that Rob and Joe had this talk? I love it. I love it. It was like a 2.5 hour talk. I cut out 36 minutes, and then from that 36 minutes, we ended up with this 15 or something like that. And the last clip, which is, I have written on it that it's my favorite and that it doesn't happen until the very end. I was dying. I was like, say something, Rob. He's there. And Joe says something like, why do people blame the Jews for what happened? Why are they mad at the Jews or anybody for crucifying Christ? Because didn't the crucifixion of Christ bring salvation? And I'm like, yes! I was friggin' screaming, yes, 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 you're right, you're right, you're right. People are mad because they don't understand God's plan. They see a man hanging on a tree and they see murder. So yes, yes, salvation is through the Jews because Jesus is a Jew. We don't exactly know what to say, except for I wish that maybe Rob wasn't so tired at the end, because he kind of conflated, he kind of missed a big opportunity to tell Joe, yes, this is where they miss it. This is where Christians miss it, and that is where the Jews missed it. You know, it was God's good pleasure to give his son for the world. If Jesus isn't God, then it doesn't even matter if he resurrected. It doesn't matter. Jesus has to be God, because in the very beginning, when God made those promises with Abraham and split open the animals and a burning flame passed between the pieces, that burning flame was the representation of God. And God says he made that promise between he and himself because there was none greater to swear by. That promise for the chosen people, for the world, a whole world to be blessed through Abraham's seed, that is God saying, when I told you on day one that the answer to the darkness was the light, that's what's going to happen when I take on flesh, when I put myself in human form. And no, the Holy Trinity, the Trinity doesn't pause for a second for that. Of course it doesn't. When God becomes flesh, he's 100% human and 100% God. Nothing got put on hold. The only thing that was withheld from Jesus was the Holy Spirit, and that's what he came to break the curse from the garden. When God clothed us in our flesh, he clothed us in our sin. It was our sin that we now wore. And that flesh now hangs on the cross. That flesh is dead. The world has no bearing on our flesh. As our flesh hangs up on the cross with Christ, it is resurrected into a new thing. The Holy Spirit is once again reunited with God's creation. It now lives in us. No, we're not going to be perfect. We can't be perfect. If we could be perfect, then there would be no need for Jesus' blood. But that's not because God saw us fuck up and saw us do the wrong thing over and over and over again. It's not. It's because it was his plan from the beginning to use a chosen race that he knew would write it down. He knew they would be good to it. He knew they would know these stories. And there will come a time when the Jewish people come out of that and they come home. God is Jesus in the flesh, and he's the spirit that lives in us. He's all things to all people at all times. And he is capable. And he made a way. But I love Rob for doing this. I love Joe for doing this. I didn't know that Jewish people didn't pray for their enemies. Like, what? Wouldn't you just do it? I don't get that part. Anyways, I will see you next time.